Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar with Akumina and Blue Modus. We're going to get started in just a minute. I see a couple of folks still trickling in, so we'll get started in about 60 seconds, so hold tight. And in the meantime, if you do have any questions for the panelists, as a reminder, you can ask it at any time. Just submit your questions into the GoToWebinar Q&A panel. Alrighty, let's get started. So before we begin, I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items. For any of you joining us today, or if you have colleagues who aren't able to make it, no worries. We will be recording the webinar and it'll be sent within 24 to 48 hours to all registrants. Today's slides will also be made available with that recording. In addition to that, like I said, you can ask questions in the GoToWebinar panel if you have them. And if we don't get them today, we will definitely be following up after the webinar. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn at Akumina and at Blue Modus for some tips and tricks, as well as best practices and thought leaderships from our teams. Also check us out on our websites, akumina.com, as well as bluemodus.com to learn more about both offerings, as well as if you'd like to see a demo, feel free to request a demo on our sites after the webinar. With that, I want to quickly introduce our speakers today. First off, we'll be having Brent Klein, a VP of Strategic Solutions from Blue Modus speaking. Following him, we will pass it over to President and CRO at Akumina, Dave Maffei, who will close out our session today. With that, Brent, I'm going to hand it off to you and you may begin.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Okay, so I want to start this presentation off with a bit of a recap and to set the stage a little bit for what we're going to talk about today. So some of this will be very familiar to a lot of you in attendance, but despite a lot of recent investments, there's a lot of research that shows that there are very few companies that are ready to really go fully remote, in their operating model in a streamlined way. Obviously, recent global events, the public health issues have really forced most enterprises to have to deal with this and figure it out immediately. And I think one thing that's very important to highlight here is that Gartner predicted back in December of 2019 in their 2020 predictions for digital workspace that by 2023, fewer than 1/3 of digital workers would select the corporate office as their preferred place to work. And by 2024, in-person meetings would drop from 60% of all the meetings happening in an enterprise to 25%. So I think it's important to note that the current situation has accelerated this process, but it's not a temporary situation that we are, we got to get through and then we're going to go back to normal. This trend was already in place, and while there might be some sort of bounce back as things try to find some semblance of normal, this is the long term, and it's likely that this is just an acceleration of that trend, not an outlier. The other situation we're facing though right now in the near term is that the same circumstances that are forcing this urgency around figuring out how to work remote more efficiently, it's also imposing a lot of limits on budgets, available resources, obviously limited timeline to get things figured out, before you stop being productive on your day-to-day work. So digital transformation, is a challenge in the best of times. And I'm sure a lot of people here will have this kind of history among their own war stories, is A lot of times it's very slow. You have a ton of risk and unknowns going into very large projects, ton of stakeholders, really drag down the process, make it long. It can just outright be exhausting, and force a lot of compromise. We often see this in all different kinds of digital transformation issues, but once launch is achieved, because it has been such an onerous monolithic task to begin with, there can be kind of everybody's just exhausted and runs out of will to continue to invest in ongoing improvements or optimizations of what's already been launched. And so you tend to end up being stuck with whatever you initially launched. And all of those past experiences kind of create this hesitation and fear. Nobody wants to tackle this kind of issue right now when everything else is happening. So we have some options for us to try and figure out what are our better options for getting there sooner, with a lower investment, with a lower timeline, something that's a little bit easier to attain. And they each have their pros and cons. The situation that's the current reality with a lot of organizations today is that you have a collection of these individual tools, and they can get the job done. You might be switching between Microsoft Teams to do your chat and your meetings, and over to SharePoint for some content and collaboration. You might be using email. You might be using individual portals, for logging for benefits management or time management or anything like that. It does get the job done, but I've been in this situation myself, where you end up with a list of bookmarks and you're always trying to figure out where you're going to accomplish different tasks. So it's certainly not an ideal situation. There are simpler, more kind of out of the box hosted solutions for intranet platforms. They can get you up and running quickly, but there's a lot of limitations to them. That same speed, comes at the price of configurability, of long-term ability to customize, to extend, to integrate, and really create, that long-term goal of the single pane of glass portal where your employees can engage, across all of the different tasks and collaborations that they need to do. So the end result there is you may end up with something faster, but much, if not all, of the upfront effort ends up being kind of throwaway if you want to go more sophisticated down the road, because you just don't have that foundation for the more sophisticated solution. Ideally, what we really want is something that lays that robust foundation, allows us to get out the door fast, but still offers lots of room for growth, still has the ability to continue to evolve and become that central employee experience platform. And I think that, this kind of approach, if done right, yields a ton of benefits. We see that smaller phases, and they reduce risk, they reduce unknowns. You're looking at things in smaller chunks, so you're not trying to predict what you will need 18 months out. You're just looking at what you're going to need, a few weeks out or a couple months out, and that is a lot easier to quantify, to estimate, to kind of go in knowing what you're going to face. That initial launch, of some kind of MVP phase of your project, it gets you to this point where you're actually starting to see real world usage, some return on your investment, and you're really getting benefits faster. They might come incrementally. You might not get every single benefit on the very first launch, but you're seeing some benefits sooner, and then you're layering them on. You also get the benefit of user feedback in real time on your initial launch, on subsequent phases, and you can really kind of fold that back into your process. If you're willing to be agile, if you're willing to listen to your employees, then instead of trying to predict everything up front, to hold, stakeholder workshops and groups, to kind of understand and have to make your guesses and your predictions about what's going to be most useful for the entire ecosystem right out of the gate, you're launching something, you're getting feedback, and you're allowing that to kind of pivot or reprioritize what you're going to do next. Each subsequent phase is going to benefit from that feedback. So that might be a mix of some updates to what you've already launched, plus some new features over time. And it's really going to get you in the long run closer to the mark, that bullseye of what exactly your organization needs to have a really engaging, really streamlined and collaborative employee experience platform. And with all of this, it doesn't sap organizational will and energy. So it really does help set the stage for the ongoing improvements, for ongoing optimization, and just continually evolving the product instead of throwing something out there and then just living with it. Now, one of the things that we talk about often when we talk about taking kind of an MVP or agile-based approach, iterative approach to any digital marketing or digital experience initiative really is that you don't have to know everything on day one. You don't have to make all of these predictions. It reduces a lot of that risk. But there are a few things you still should consider on day one. And if you're kind of centering around these high priority decisions, it really helps lay that groundwork so you are setting yourself up for that long-term success. So number one is really just to lay the right foundation. You want to consider that long-term vision, that end goal, right at the beginning, at least enough to say that whatever tool, whatever platform you're choosing to be kind of the core, the hub of your solution can get you there. You don't need to implement all of it on day one. You don't even need to know exactly how you're going to implement some of those features, but whether it's a robust API, meeting certain security measures, whatever the case is, you need to make sure that you are at least selecting that core platform to be that long-term capable foundation. Defining the MVP, I think that something that goes along with this is managing expectations and managing the involved stakeholders, understanding who needs to be involved for the MVP, who needs to be communicated with, how you're going to make decisions quickly and efficiently, and really understanding what you need to launch on day one that will meet your needs without hindering your team compared to what they have today or taking away something that they're depending on. But still setting up that stage that other features are going to come. Manage those expectations, understand how that open communication within your organization can help make things easier, more collaborative, and not a disappointment or something along those lines throughout the process. And then also just creating a culture of optimization. I think that so many organizations, and we see this internally on the more employee experience side of things, we see this externally and websites and digital marketing, we see this kind of across the board, is that history of exhausting enormous projects that carry a lot of risk, that involve a lot of compromise, they really kind of take away from the culture of evolution, of iterative improvements and things like that. And that can even kind of sap into operations and budgeting and planning. A lot of organizations need to make a shift in the expectations for how they're spending, because they expect to have an enormous, CapEx expenditure every 3 to 5 years, and then very little, in OpEx maintenance over time. Whereas this can be an operational or budgetary shift toward smaller initial CapEx, and then expecting to use ongoing operational expenses toward gradually improving and optimizing what you've already created. So don't underestimate the idea of, it's not just this process to be followed, but it's a mind shift. It's a company culture, and I think that can go a long way toward kind of setting up for success in these types of projects. So just a really simple visualization of this process and the way that we've seen it be successful in the past is, if you kind of think about your minimum viable product, what your core launch needs to be, you want to set yourself up for that long-term goal. So as we mentioned, we know that it can do the things we want it to do down the road. It doesn't have to all be implemented. So it may be that your phase one launch is that MVP, and you're leaving some additional features, time off requests, benefits enrollment, different things like that in the individual portals that you might be dealing with still today. You're not solving every single problem on day one, but you're also not taking anything away. And then phase two, you use that feedback. You use your prioritization, your knowledge of your stakeholders, your balance of what really is most important to kind of loop into that MVP over time. Whether it's to eliminate the cost of an external tool that you're using before contracting is up, or whether it's just, hey, this is the most used and cumbersome, piece of outlying technology that we have. Every organization is going to have a different sense of prioritization there, but you're going to start kind of decommissioning and replacing, or just integrating piece by piece into that MVP. So it grows in its capabilities, and you're kind of dropping off those external tools one by one. So I've got written here phased, etc., but this can be as many or as few phases as it has to be. You can tackle, multiple features at a time, or just keep them simple one at a time with more frequent release cadence. But whatever the case is, you want to incorporate those insights from previous user experience, see if that needs to tweak anything about what you're going to do next, redefine or reprioritize how you're going to take on your next phase or your next couple of phases. And then again, go with, integrating in existing tools, or replacing, with an internally built tool, or whatever the case may be, so that you can decommission more of your outliers, rinse and repeat. And that long-term goal is really the idea of that single pane of glass, that you're working toward that streamlined employee experience that is really all encompassing, and tailored exactly to the needs of your organization. And again, there's not really an end phase here, because the idea is that you're always going to have something else that you want to optimize. Now, obviously, you'll get to some point where the prioritization might be so low for small tweaks that you're only launching updates in, once every quarter or once every 6 months, and that's fine. That's a great place to be in. But just embracing the idea that this is a process ongoing. It's not just a single project to get through as fast as possible and then put behind you. And with that, for some more specifics, I'll hand it over to Dave.
Thanks, Brent. So everyone, I think that Brent does a really good job of talking about this concept of sort of starting small, thinking big, but acting quickly. And we at Ecumena are highly focused on this sort of iterative and agile approach to embarking on this digital workplace journey. I think we've seen over the last 5 years, lots of enterprises try and take sort of a big bang approach to solving their employee experience problems. But the reality of it is that employee experience is so unique to each organization, and it's so unique to each individual, that the goal has to be to get some sort of table stakes up and running quickly, that initial MVP that actually has an impact on how people do their jobs, right? Our goal here is to make your entire workforce's job better, faster, and easier. That is the underlying thought process behind everything that we do. And so when we think about that, for us at Ecumena, it's all about how can we deliver you lots of capabilities out of the box that allow you to get up and running quickly, with an understanding and a recognition that this is not an intranet in a box that you're turning on and it just sort of is what it is, but rather it's a starting point on this journey. And so I have up in front of you on the screen an example of one of our customers. This happens to be a Fortune 500 customer who has gone through the process of working with their 15,000 global employees around delivering first sort of the modern intranet solution, but then thinking about the modern intranet solution through sort of another lens, right? Thinking through not just how do we make things easier for corporate communications, or how do we deliver the right news or information or alerts to our people, but how do we think about beyond that initial launch? How do we think beyond that initial MVP about how we can put the employee in the center? And so while everything you see on the homepage of this particular customer is giving you access to be able to navigate to department sites and see breaking news that happens to be targeted to you. If, in this particular case, everyone's seeing that first news alert, and then others are seeing the news alerts because they're in a leadership group. So for us, everything is still personalized, everything is still targeted, but it is more genericized in terms of delivering those table stakes sort of capabilities. When you go beyond that and you start thinking about what's next, that's where you really need to start thinking about how you put the employee in the center of sort of that thinking. And so what Brant's showing you on the screen right now is this same customer. So great, we got everything out the door, up and running. We hit those table stakes elements. We were able to launch quickly. We were able to launch across the globe. But now if we put the employee in the center and we think about really solving their problems, what are the journey elements we need to think about? How is that employee being onboarded into the business? How is that employee interacting across their team and their cross-functional units and with themselves? How are they having personal life experiences and innovation creations for themselves? And how does that translate back to the work they're doing across the business so that they know that the things they're doing are making a difference not only for themselves and for their careers, but also for the business? And then obviously we talked at the outset about how you onboard that employee. Well, the reality of it is you need to think about the full sort of 360-degree view and how are you offboarding that employee. And so when you start to think about this and you map out this type of an employee journey, it's not okay to just stand up a modern intranet. That's important, but it's the first step. And it's thinking about each of these elements that are on the screen in front of you and the interactions that exist between your people and the business and your people and one another that will allow you to really start enhancing the employee experience at your business. It's not important enough to just put something out there and it's sort of set it and forget it. Those days are gone. I recognize, and we at Acumatica recognize the need to get something out the door quickly so that you can have that time to value impact. But if you're not thinking about the broader journey of how you take an employee and make them a productive part of your workforce and your ecosystem, then you're selling both that employee and the business short. So we've partnered with Blue Motus to put together something that will allow us together to be able to get you as an enterprise up and running very quickly. So this is all built on top of the Acumatica EXP, which has over 4.5 million daily active users using the software. But it is an actual product called Launch, and it's delivered by Blue Motus, and it's this sort of rapidly deployable MVP implementation on top of the Acumatica platform with that eye on that initial MVP. So how do we get you up and running quickly? I mean, the amount of demand that we've seen for this, especially in the last 2 months, where you have organizations who entered this pandemic unprepared for how to better interact with, adapt to, and support sort of this new way of working with their entire workforce, the demand for this has been through the roof. So Launch, as Brant will talk about in a second, really allows you to get up and running quickly, quite literally in a matter of weeks. So we're taking the time to value and really putting it on steroids so that we can get you something that's functional and that's usable and that will actually start that journey with your employees. And then you've got the foundation set to start thinking about not just, okay, we solved that MVP one, where do we go from here? And so, Brant, do you want to take a couple of minutes and just talk with everyone on the phone about what Launch is and what they could expect to get in sort of that initial deployment?
Sure. So as Dave mentioned, Launch is built on top of Acumatica, and one of the valuable points of clarification here, I think, is that we'll call it a product. For lack of a better term, it has a name, but it is essentially just an implementation of Acumatica. We've worked very hard to stay in line with the way Acumatica does things, using and leveraging the Acumatica platform and the way that it would happen with any other implementation. Because the goal here isn't to create a watered down version of Acumatica, but it's to create a fast start implementation that still has the long-term goals of any other fully customized implementation. You have the full room for growth over time, What we're doing here is we're just taking the core set of modern intranet features. We've got common layouts. We've got kind of a theming or brand application tool to allow you to quickly apply your brand look and feel to that experience, and then integrate it with your own, Office 365 infrastructure. And that predetermined kind of set of features and initial limited configurability gives us the capability to really get this up to speed very quickly and out the door. But you still have the full foundation and capabilities of Acumatica underlying, so you're not sacrificing your long-term capabilities by choosing this option that gets you launched a lot quicker than you might normally see. So, everything that's kind of included here is you can see on the screenshots the views of what the general layouts might look like for a for a dashboard for someone logging in. But it's fully responsive. It meets accessibility requirements. It's fully branded and themed to your look and feel, your colors, your brand. You have Acumatica's same content and site management system. It integrates right out of the box with SharePoint or Office 365 for access to all of your existing files and authentication through all of your existing employee accounts. Search is built in. The forms and workflow, alerts, notifications, full library of all of these widgets to create new department pages and other types of personalized pages, all within that theme that we put together with your branding. And then for initial scope, we're targeting 2 employee personas, although again, that is because it's a fast start package, not because that's a limitation of Acumatica. There really are no limitations on that side of things as far as where you can go eventually with this product. And then you've got still your ability to create department or business unit specific site packages as well. So all the basics of any of the kind of turnkey modern intranet portals that you might expect, just packaged up and built really well, highly performant, responsive, accessible on the Acumatica platform to get you out the door really quickly, but still to be able to provide that long-term growth capability, because underlying you still have Acumatica's full APIs, full capabilities for customization of integration for other tools and platforms. So it's just a fast start on this longer journey, as Dave called it.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that, Brant, before we kick into Q&A is that it really is a great starting place. The leadership team at Acumatica and the leadership team at Blue Motus have been working together for almost a decade. There's a lot of familiarity between our leadership teams, and one of the main reasons we decided to partner together was because Blue Motus has traditionally been an expert in the customer experience space, and more of their customers have been turning to both us and them and saying, look, you're an expert in customer experience, but the problem that we've got to solve today is employee experience. And so, we're really happy with our partnership with Blue Motus. This launch offering is fantastic. It really is one of the fastest, if not the fastest ways to deploy Acumatica by any partner, quite literally on the planet. And Acumatica software is used in over 80 different countries around the world and in over 60 different languages. So kudos to the team at Blue Motus for creating something that can be deployed so quickly for our joint customers.
Appreciate it, Dave. And yeah, I would just reiterate, going back to those first few considerations for really setting yourself up for success long term, this really checks the boxes. The idea here is you're choosing Acumatica as a quality platform with those long-term capabilities. You just happen to also be choosing a package or an implementation of Acumatica that is ready to get you started really quickly. So when we go back to those, key considerations for having a successful MVP and iterative approach to employee engagement and employee experience, this really just checks all of those boxes. All right.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. With that, we are at the half-hour mark, but Dave, we did have a couple technical questions around Akumina, so maybe we can get through those really quickly. The first one was, how does Akumina handle integrations? Do they have any that are out of the box at a high level? I don't think you have to go through all of them, but I think it's just I think they just want to hear an overview of that.
Yeah, for sure. So one of Akumina's sort of biggest selling points and biggest capabilities is its ability to integrate across your entire tech stack. Brent used the phrase single pane of glass earlier, and that's been a really strong focus for us. So we recognize that while Office 365 or Microsoft 365 is a big part of most of our customers' ecosystem, it's not everything, right? They've got HR systems like Workday or Ultimate. They've got timekeeping systems like Kronos. They've got expense systems like Concur or ticket management service systems like ServiceNow. All of the data and intelligence that lives across these different platforms is critical to an employee fundamentally doing their job better. And so Akumina integrates with all of the tools that I just mentioned, and quite literally hundreds more out of the box, so that you can actually truly create that single pane of glass experience where you're not having to force the user to consistently context switch between different applications, different user experience and user interfaces, different mobile apps. You're putting everything in the power of their hands to be able to interact across the entire tech ecosystem.
Gotcha. And then the last question, Dave, you touched upon this a little bit, but with this out of the box solution, are you able to personalize this a bit by department, or is it just all one size fits all out of the box?
Yeah, I would, for the person that asked that question, I would go beyond department. The idea here is that you're personalized this experience for each employee. And that's sort of what I was trying to get after by the concept of putting the employee in the middle of the problem you're trying to solve. Employee experience isn't a one size fits all thing, and it can't be sort of done with broad brushstrokes, right? Because the experience, even inside one particular organization, you've got C-suite, you've got management, you have your traditional knowledge workers, maybe you have people in a call center, you have deskless workers that are maybe working in a retail store on the manufacturing line, or in a technician truck or something like that. Every one of these employees is dramatically different, and the fundamental way that they need to be able to do their job to be successful is different from even their own coworkers. And so we personalize down to the individual employee or type of employee so that you're delivering that hyper-personalized experience. And the reason why people are coming back to use this new digital workplace isn't because the news is better, it's because the news is driven for them. It isn't because of the tools are there or better, it's because the tools are relevant to their job. And you're really focusing on sort of the productivity and the innovation of that individual user.
Sure. So that's all of our questions today. I want to quickly thank both of our speakers, Brent and Dave, for their presentations, and thank everyone who joined us today. I know a number of you were asking for some follow-up, so we'll definitely have some of our reps reach out to you to make sure any additional questions you folks have are answered. With that, the webinar recording and slides will be sent out within 24 to 48 hours, so keep an eye on your email. That will be sent from our Akumina alias. With that, everyone have a great day, and thank you again for joining us.